Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining me, Caitlin O'Shaughnessy, and Simon for our first Facebook Live and our first YouTube Live on our YouTube channel. So today I'm here with Simon. I'll let him introduce himself.
Hi, welcome. I am Simon Sandoval-Moschenberg. I'm a partner at Murray Osorio, and I focus primarily on federal litigation on behalf of immigrants.
Yes. And so today, Simon and I will be talking to you about ways to speed up an asylum case. For the purposes of this live stream today, we're going to limit our discussion to options for speeding up only affirmative asylum cases, so cases that are pending with the asylum office and not with the immigration court. And as a reminder, if after this video you decide that you want to meet with either Simon or I or another one of our attorneys, you can give us a call or email us, mention that you saw our video on YouTube, and we'll give you a 50% discount on your consultation. For today, we're going to offer you two main options for speeding up an asylum case. And those options are number one, filing an expedite request, and number two, filing a mandamus action. There are some other options that exist out there, such as seeking congressional assistance or attempting to do an ombudsperson inquiry. But generally speaking, we find those options to be a little bit less effective. So, Simon, people come to us talking about the asylum backlog all the time. How long do you see people wait for asylum interviews, and what do you know about that backlog?
We have clients who come to us who've been waiting for an interview for 5, 6, 7, and even in some cases 8 years. They filed when Barack Obama was still president of the United States. They've done everything they were supposed to do, and they were told, sit tight and we'll schedule you for an interview pretty soon. And now, 2 presidents later, and they're still waiting.
Right. And so I imagine most people in those situations do want to make their case go faster. But are there any situations in which a person probably shouldn't try and make their asylum case go faster?
Well, before you're going to take any steps to make your asylum case go faster, you have to make sure you're actually ready for the interview. That means ready in terms of you've got all your evidence lined up, in the can, ready to go. Documents in foreign languages have already been certified translations into English. If you need police reports from your home country, you've got the police reports. If you need medical records from your home country, you've got the medical records, so that you're not scrambling to get all that stuff together in the span of 3 or 4 weeks if you actually are successful in getting an interview scheduled. The other thing you have to consider is whether the country conditions are ripe for your particular asylum claim to go forward now. You could take a country like Ethiopia, where it seems like every 6 to 12 months there's like a big change in sort of who's in power, who's in the government. You don't want to be interviewed at a particular moment when your group is in power, right? However, if it's a moment when your group is out of power and is being persecuted by the people in power, now's a good time for your interview to go forward. So that's the other thing to take into consideration when thinking about pushing hard to get an asylum interview scheduled. Are the country conditions right now really right for my claim to be granted?
Yeah, that makes sense. So we want to make sure that before people start to take these steps to speed things up, that everything is prepared for their actual asylum case and that it makes sense based on what's going on in their country. So one option that we mentioned at the beginning was filing an expedite request. And so I have had a lot of success with clients in filing expedite requests in the past. Generally speaking, USCIS doesn't grant very many expedite requests, but I have seen them work in a lot of instances. And so I think it's important to offer this option to some of our viewers as well. And so in situations that I've seen expedite requests work, usually it has to do with someone having a really urgent humanitarian issue, like a serious illness like cancer or HIV, or often I've had success with the immediate family members in the home country being actively threatened by the government, and I've had good documentation to show that. And so I find that this type of situation works well for an expedite request, even if a person hasn't been waiting these 5, 6, 7, 8 years. The times that I haven't seen an expedite request work, though, for people are for more general reasons. Like if it's just the case that the person is separated from their family, I generally don't see them getting granted unless there's some sort of really intense amplifying factor, like small children who have PTSD or something like that. And so, Simon, do you think that absent those issues, like absent a good case for an expedite request, that a person could look at a mandamus? Under what circumstances does mandamus versus expedite request make sense, in your opinion?
Sure. Well, it's never a bad thing to start with an expedite request, right? For two reasons. One, it's a pretty low lift. It's not an expedite request isn't a form, right? When you applied for asylum, you filled out a form I-589. There's no form for the expedite request. It's really just a letter with some evidence stapled to the letter, and it costs the price of a stamp. So there's sort of no downside to trying an expedite request. And even if the expedite request doesn't work and you do decide to end up filing a mandamus action, at least when you go to court, you can tell the judge, hey, judge, we tried everything first, right? We did an expedite request. We got no response. Maybe I called the 1-800 number 3 times over the past 3 years. They had no information to tell me. The other thing that an expedite request does is it puts certain facts into the record about why you need your asylum case to be scheduled now. Remember that if you're waiting years and years and years and years for your asylum interview, you're in good company. You're in good company with hundreds of thousands of other immigrants from countries across the world in these United States who are also waiting, right? Just as long as you are. And in order to persuade someone, an adjudicator, in order to persuade them that your case should be plucked out of the pile and scheduled for an interview now. And when I say pile, it literally is a pile. If you go to the asylum office, they have piles and piles of paper files just stacked up in the hallway by the copier. So why should your case be plucked out of that pile and scheduled for an interview now? Well, that's going to have to do with facts having to do with now, right? When you filed your asylum application 6 years ago, you put in a lot of information about what happened to you back in your home country. But the expedite request or the mandamus really depends on what your life is like now. How are you suffering now from not having a permanent legal immigration status? You've got a work permit, right? So you can work, but maybe there are certain jobs that you can't apply to, right? I've had a client recently who's a very high-skilled airplane mechanic, and he can't get jobs with defense contractors like Boeing because he doesn't have a permanent legal immigration status. Or maybe it's a medical issue, right? Maybe you need to get some form of health insurance that's only available to you with a permanent legal immigration status. Maybe it's intensified attacks against your immediate family members in the home country, right? Your wife was just recently arrested and detained for 3 days, for being involved in political activities back in the home country. But it's got to be something in the now, as opposed to, just spending more time and effort talking about why 7 years ago you fled your country. So you need to get those facts in the record before USCIS. No judge is going to blame USCIS for not taking account of facts that they didn't know in the first place, right?
Of course.
So if you have a small business here in the United States, and you've been denied a loan from the Small Business Association because you don't have a permanent legal immigration status, USCIS doesn't know that unless you tell them that. And the way that you can tell them that is by means of an expedite request. So the expedite request, aside from, maybe it'll get granted, the expedite request serves 2 functions. One, it tells the judge, hey, we tried everything first. We didn't just rush to court. We tried everything else first. And 2, it can get certain helpful facts into the record before USCIS.
Right. So the expedite request, it doesn't necessarily need to be something that a person does on its own. It works really well in conjunction with the mandamus action. So can you
Right.
walk
This isn't
us?
an either or here.
Right.
Yeah, just
Can
this isn't an either or. It's not expedite request or mandamus. It's expedite request and then mandamus. Yeah.
And so when we get to the actual mandamus part, how does that work? Can you just walk us through that process, kind of how long things take, what people should expect through that process?
Sure. So mandamus is a fancy schmancy word for suing the government. You're suing the government for essentially falling down on the job, for not doing their duty, which is to schedule you for an asylum interview. And a lot of people think that that's a really scary concept to sue the government. Like, oh man, if I sue the government, they're going to hate me and they're going to deny my asylum application. That's not the way it works here. I mean, honestly, they don't really seem to mind, right? I mean, when you sue the government in a mandamus, which, you know, it's November 2023, our office has filed literally 20 of these just this month alone. And in 0 such cases have we ever seen straight up retaliation from the government. When you sue the government in a mandamus, they're going to do one of 2 things. They're either going to roll over and say, all right, fine, you want an asylum interview, here's your asylum interview. You know, come in 6 weeks. And again, you better darn well be ready for that asylum interview, because if they get an asylum interview notice in 6 weeks after you sue them, you can't turn around and say, I need a little more time. So they might just roll over, and they do this in a lot of cases. They just roll over and they say, all right, you want an asylum interview that bad? Here you go, take it. Or they might fight back and they might say, no, like, this person should keep waiting. You should keep waiting. And they essentially then they're making a judge decide. And the criteria that the judge is going to use are, there's a fancy schmancy legal test with 6 different factors, but really it all boils down to, why do you need it now so much that I, a judge, should order the agency around and tell them what to do and tell them to pluck your case out of the pile? And here, the mere passage of time, it's just not enough. You need some personalized facts as to why I need my interview now, because I'm suffering a little more than most of those other hundreds of thousands of people who've been waiting just as long as I have. Notice I have not yet used the word line, right? The judge is not plucking you out of line, it's plucking you out of a pile, because there is no line. USCIS likes to lie and say that there's a line. It's not true, right? It is not the case that they are processing applications in order of filing, right? This is not Disney World. To the contrary, it's literally a pile. Sometimes it feels like they just throw everything up in the air, watch the paper sort of flutter down. But we have received evidence in one of the cases that we're litigating against the government right now, that they have in one asylum office, our local asylum office in Arlington, Virginia, they have tens of thousands of pending cases in what they call their backlog. And they schedule about 1 or 2 backlog cases a week. So, you know, I'm no math genius. That's why I became a lawyer, not a doctor. But, you know, it is not likely that most people in the backlog will be interviewed before they die a natural death of old age, right?
Wow,
so unfortunately, filing one of these mandamuses, it's no longer about speeding up your case. It's now actually about just getting your case heard at all. So again, that's not to say that you can do this after, you know, 2 years. You can, but there's got to be very extreme facts in order to be able to do it after 2 years. But, you know, if you've been waiting for several years and you have some facts that you can articulate of why this is causing you harm beyond just the psychological stress of waiting. I understand how stressful it is to wait and not know, but every single person is suffering that same level of psychological stress, right? So there needs to be some concrete material facts. We have a client right now who got offered a promotion at her job, but in order to accept that promotion, she would need to be able to travel internationally from time to time. She can't necessarily do that while she's waiting on her asylum. Once she gets asylum, she can get advanced parole and travel as long as she doesn't go back to her home country, which is not what she was being asked to do. That's the type of articulable fact, right? Or we have a client literally whose daughter was given an award, and the award came with a free trip to Mexico because the daughter's doing really well in Spanish class. The
Uh-huh.
daughter's a derivative on his asylum application, and she couldn't go, right? So that's the kind of example of very concrete, specific, personalized harm that not having an asylum interview can cause, that is sufficient to be able to tell the judge, look, judge, I understand that everyone's waiting. I understand that they only have so many asylum officers in one office, but here's why they need to prioritize me and my case.
So I wanted to just loop back on one thing, because whenever I talk to clients about this, one of the really big fears is this retaliation. And I, like you, know that it's legally prohibited to start with, but I also think that it's helpful for people to know that when you go to the asylum office and you get interviewed, you're getting interviewed by a person at this level. And he or she is an individual who's interviewing you. And when you file a mandamus against the government, that individual officer who's interviewing you has nothing to do with it. So sometimes I don't even think that they know that a mandamus has been filed in that situation. So I think that it's really easy for people who are nervous about filing these to misunderstand the number of degrees of separation between the government that you're suing and the actual individual person in front of you. And so that's another thing that I always like to remind people, is that you really don't need to worry about that retaliation. And especially when people come and apply for asylum because they've been politically persecuted in their home countries, I feel like that idea is really hard to grasp. But like you said, with the 20 cases you filed this month, no retaliation, it's not something I've ever seen or heard from any other attorney as well. And I think that's important.
That's right. I mean, look, I get it. You come from a country where if you mess with the government, you might wake up one morning, with your head in a sack at the bottom of a river with a bullet hole through your bedroom window, right? But, I'm happy to say that that's not the way it works here. We have done, dozens upon dozens upon dozens of these cases successfully. And I really can't point to one in which I would say, wow, after they did a mandamus, the government really started jamming on that person and they denied their asylum case unjustly. We just haven't seen that. I mean, I can't say it's impossible. Anything's possible with the immigration system these days, but I've really never seen a case that makes me say, wow, this person got retaliated against for filing a mandamus. It just doesn't seem to work that way.
I think that I agree for sure. And so are there any risks or downsides to filing a mandamus?
The risk, the legal downside to filing a mandamus is that your mandamus is denied, and then you are where you are right now, right? A mandamus is asking to speed up your case. If the mandamus is denied, your case does not get sped up. Well, your case isn't sped up right now, so you haven't really lost anything per se. I mean, there's a filing fee. You have to pay everything, God's green earth has a filing fee, and so you have to pay $402 to the court to file a mandamus. But a lot of people find that that's $402 very well spent because it takes their case out of a literal black hole and finally gets it put on a track for scheduling and adjudication.
But just to be clear, if I file a mandamus and it gets denied, my asylum's not denied.
That's exactly right. Again, a mandamus is seeking to speed up the case. And if the mandamus is denied, then the case is not sped up, but it doesn't actually affect the substantive outcome of the case.
So in terms of legal actions, in my opinion, it's pretty low risk.
Yeah, that's definitely right. The other thing is, I have to say there's a lot of people, especially those who've been waiting really, for the better part of a decade, 6, 7, 8 years, who at this point, frankly, are at the point where they would rather the asylum office deny their case rather than just living in perpetuity in this pending status. Because remember, when the asylum office denies your case, that doesn't mean you get a deportation order and put on a plane. To the contrary, That means you get put in court proceedings, in immigration court, where you can renew your asylum claim. And immigration court, yeah, it's slow, but nothing compared to the asylum office, right? Immigration court is a place where you can actually get a trial. You can put in witnesses, you can bring in experts if you've got an expert, and you can really, get things moving and actually get an adjudication and an outcome to your case. So, of course, everyone would prefer to win asylum at the asylum office.
Naturally.
But there are some people who basically sort of come to the point in life where they realize, I'm never going to get anything out of the asylum office. I'd rather just get this case moving to court. And that's just sort of one thing to take into consideration.
And so I know at our office, we represent people in all kinds of immigration matters. So for our clients that have hired us for asylum, we also do their mandamus actions. What about for other people that have a lawyer for their asylum case, but that lawyer doesn't know how or can't do a mandamus, but they otherwise want to stay with that lawyer? What can we offer in situations like that?
Yeah, I'm remembering Barack Obama selling Obamacare, saying, if you like your doctor, you can stick with your doctor. If you like your immigration lawyer, you can stick with your immigration lawyer. The mandamus is done in a different court system. It's done in the federal district court. Most immigration lawyers don't practice before that court. They practice before USCIS. They practice before the immigration courts. But this is a court in which they just don't know their way around, right? And so a lot of them, I would say most of the mandamus cases that we get are referred to us from other immigration lawyers who say to themselves and say to their clients, wow, this is taking too long. I recognize that it's time for mandamus. Why don't you head over to Murray Osorio and they'll do one for you? And we're happy to do that. To the contrary, let's say you filed your asylum case all by yourself. You didn't have a lawyer. Maybe you used a case writer. Maybe you used a notario. Maybe you used a lawyer who's since retired because it was 8 years ago.
8 years ago, yeah. That happens a lot.
Right. Of course, we'd be more than happy. Of course, we need to, we need to look over the file. We need to, review it. But we'd be more than happy to assume representation of the asylum case as well. That's really up to you.
All right. Well, thank you so much for having this chat with me and sharing all this information. We're running low on time. So is there anything else that you think people should know about mandamus actions, things to keep in mind when deciding whether to file one?
Yeah, I think the most important thing, again, not to repeat myself, is that you've already told USCIS why it is you need a quick adjudication, right? So you can do that through an expedite request. You can do that through other means. But I got to say, these days it's becoming more and more necessary to do a mandamus to even just get your case scheduled at all. The very sad case that I have right now of a client who did an expedite request, had his expedite request granted, was given a quick interview, and now it's over a year later and he hasn't gotten a decision yet, right? So a case in which an expedite was granted and he's still now waiting over a year for a decision. So we've just filed a mandamus last week on that case, and I'm fairly confident that we'll be able to prevail. But again, the expedite request itself is not the silver bullet. A lot of people have done expedite requests, 6 months ago, 12 months ago. They're still waiting. Really, you're at the point where you're going to have to do a mandamus sooner or later. You might as well just do it now.
And this was actually something that I meant to ask you earlier. We've been talking during the past 20 minutes about filing a mandamus action to expedite the scheduling of your interview. But I believe that you can also file a mandamus, like you said, for a long pending decision. Because I know I've met with a number of people who sometimes, like your situation, they've had their interview expedited, or they haven't. They've just gone for a regularly scheduled interview. But then they don't get a decision for a year, sometimes 18 months, 2 years. And we can file a mandamus there too, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I wouldn't file a mandamus, 4 or 5 months after an interview, but certainly if you get to the point where you're 12 months out, there's no decision, you make the inquiries, they say, keep waiting, we'll get to it when we get to it. Yeah, at that point, again, I wouldn't go straight. You don't want to run straight to court. You want to be able to tell the judge, look, Judge, I tried everything first. I did
Mhm.
inquiries. I did, went through, showed up at the office, what have you.
Mhm,
But once
mhm.
you've tried everything there is to try, absolutely, you can do a mandamus on that case as well.
Right, right. Well, hopefully this info was helpful to everyone who's watching. We also do our best to respond to comments. So if you're watching this video after the fact and you leave a comment, I will do my best to get back to you in a timely manner. And as a reminder, like at the beginning, if you saw this video and you want to do a consultation, if you mention YouTube, we will give you 50% off that consultation. So thank you for joining us, and stay tuned for more videos and lives on our YouTube channel.
Thanks very much. This was fun.